All right, guys. So this is video 12 in our series of should you build a gaming PC or so you want to build a gaming PC. And today we're going to talk about cooling. And really it's going to come down to fans versus AIOs or liquid cooling, and kind of why I am not a huge fan of liquid cooling. Not necessarily against it. It's not something I wouldn't use. It's just something I don't use because I don't have purpose for it at this point. And I want to go over that because I feel like the conversation since liquid cooling has come about has been like, if you're not using liquid cooling, it's just nothing's going to work for you and you're wasting your money and your system just will not function properly. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I'm making this partially because I don't see a lot of videos out there talking about still using fan cooling or air cooling, where I think it's still perfectly useful for many cases. I also am going to touch on where I don't think that the testing of liquid coolers has been done in a way that suits every user, and I'll go over that. But yeah, a lot of tech channels are really dead set on pushing out videos, really squeezing out 1 to 2% extra performance, and to me, it's just not worth it. To their credit, some of these channels have talked about where they can do it, they can squeeze out that extra performance, but it's really not worth it. So some have said that. Others make it sound like you absolutely must do this, or you're just wasting your time. And we're going to talk about other areas with liquid cooling that you may not know, because in my personal life, as I've encountered people that talk about wanting new machine builds or looking at the parts in there, they make some assumptions about liquid cooling that are not correct. So that's where we're going to start with this video, is going over that and talking about AIOs and fans, benefits kind of both and stuff, and then go from there. So let's get into it, guys. All right. So what is an AIO? AIOs, or all-in-one coolers, kind of interchangeable in the terms there. People say liquid cooling or they say AIOs. I've even seen in the same videos where people are just using the terms interchangeably, and it is the same. They're essentially units that have a piece that attaches directly to the lid or the top of the processor, and then passes liquid over that lid that attaches to the socket, to the processor socket, and then that heat is transferred through a liquid to a radiator, where then fans either push or pull air through that radiator to get that fluid cooled off. So as it's passing through, the volumetric flow of that liquid is low enough that there's enough time for the fans to theoretically remove that heat, or if you will, in practice, remove that heat, because liquid coolers have been used for a while now and they do work. And then you have different sizes on those radiators and different fan sizes. I've seen setups where people mount the radiator to the front of their case and have the air pushing out. I've seen it where air is being pulled in. There's plenty of debate online about the best way to set up your cooler, your liquid cooler. I've also seen people attach the radiators to the top. There's radiators for graphics cards at this point, or liquid coolers for graphics cards, I should say. Pretty much anything you want to liquid cool, somebody's probably figured that out and it's there. And so the next part comes up is, what is in a liquid cooler? What liquid are they using? And I'm going to tell you now because I've encountered a lot of people who seem to think it's Freon. And I used to think this back before I looked into it. This was early on in the days of liquid cooling. My big fear was like Freon was going to get all over your system, and it's not Freon. It is, let me look at the word, ethylene glycol, which is essentially antifreeze, which makes sense. We essentially use liquid cooling in cars, right? You have your radiator, you have the antifreeze that runs that radiator. A giant fan is usually bolted to that, or an intercooler, something to that degree. And the air is transferred out of the vehicle. I think the fan pulls it off your radiator. I don't think the fans are blowing air through the radiator. I could be wrong. But anyway, similar setup. It's a similar setup. So that's what's happening there. And so it makes sense that kind of got adopted over to computers. In theory, it makes sense to me. But we don't use Freon, and there's a couple reasons for that, because to me, Freon would be the ultimate way to chill a PC. One, it's overkill. Using Freon would be completely overkill, if you've wondered about that. If you've ever used a window unit AC, not a swamp cooler, but an AC, you probably have experienced a point where there's kind of this equilibrium, it's probably the wrong term for that, where the cooler ices over on the outside and then you're not getting any cooler on the inside anymore and you start getting condensation. Similar could probably happen in a PC. So those kind of issues. Freon costs more. The ethylene glycol is exceptionally cheap. That's the reason why they use it. It's really cheap. It's the cheapest solution they can use. Water would probably have issues with calcium deposits. Yeah, sure, you could use distilled water. I've seen people talk about that. I've seen do-it-yourself stuff where people do that, but also water's going to evaporate off. The Freon is less likely, or Freon, the ethylene glycol is not going to evaporate off on your liquid cooling unit. So, and it has a lot more saturation for heat. That's important too. You can saturate the liquid a lot more, which makes sense why they use it. The liquid cooling setup does make sense to some effect, and I'll get to where I think it could be effective in a lot of cases. But um so we don't use Freon. Also, there is, now me, I like static noises, so I don't mind the sound of fans. I've worked in server rooms. I find it very relaxing and soothing. I know I'm an odd man out on that. But additionally, um you have to have a pump, you have to have a compressor and all that stuff. And one is space. Even if you could fit all of that in an area this size of, which you probably could, a power supply, cases are not designed to use that kind of hardware. Additionally, condensation issues are a problem. Water, there in most coolers, there is a drip system, so removing that water could be a problem. So you can kind of see some of the complications of using Freon there. But again, overkill would probably solve that problem right there. It's just overkill, even in the most extreme circumstances. Again, if people were going to do extreme tests on processors like we've seen in the past, if you haven't seen these videos, they're neat, but where they do liquid nitrogen to cool a processor while they're extremely overclocking it, that might be a use case, but I think you might saturate even the Freon in that case. So that's kind of why we don't see Freon in there. And so, that's kind of a short reason to how that works, what's in there, and why. So we'll move on to another section here, which is why do people use AIOs and not fans? And so a lot of people have been told or have made the assumption that AIOs are just quieter. They're just quieter. They don't use fans. I've heard that before. AIOs do use fans. They absolutely do have fans. They either have 2 or 3, depending on the setup, 120 millimeter or 140 millimeter size in those fans. They absolutely do use fans. They can get loud. Depending on how much heat is saturating the fluid within the radiator, those fans can crank up and get fast. And I have seen videos where they've done testing and in actual use where a machine is performing to a certain degree and it's loud even with a liquid cooler. So no, they're not necessarily quieter. I sit away from my machine. I think it matters, and I'm going to touch on distance from machine multiple times probably in this, but depending how far you are away from your tower, the noise is probably not going to be a problem. Even in smaller builds, if you're using fans, consoles use fans. A lot of people don't hear their fans, and those fans are there. If you're up close to your console, you'll hear it. Even on the Xbox One, you could hear fans. Even on the PS4, you could hear fans if you were close enough to it. But most stuff was temperature controlled well enough that it wasn't an issue. Now, consoles are designed differently. I know that's an argument to be made, is that they have tuned those to not put off as much heat and to perform a certain way. I get that. But even with desktops, I have ran desktops my entire life, air cooling, and have not really had a noise issue. Even on hot days, the fans spin up. Like right now, I can hear my GPU fan running, but it's not something that's exceptionally loud or is going to be interrupting me. And again, are you wearing headphones? See, that's the other thing. If you're wearing headphones in gaming, you are probably not going to notice the fans. I've done testing with friends where I have my fans running full blast and been on a headset with them. The noise cancel's going to completely solve that problem. So if your issue is, oh, the fans are so loud, nobody's going to be able to hear me on mic, not a problem. I have streamed before and tested with my fans all the way up, both on my Potato and this new machine. I've done all that testing and have had no issues. Nobody's heard anything. It's been fine. So I think a lot of that is marketing maybe pushed to people, or the fear of missing out on having a liquid cooler, or I want to be the cool guy that's got liquid cooling, whatever it is. I think it's served very well to sabotage people and getting setups done cheaper, than what they could be in a lot of cases. And we'll touch on that later. But, it really depends on the setup you have. If you are in an exceptionally hot environment, right, fans may not be the best use case for you. Liquid cooling may not be, though. It really depends. You're going to have to look into all of that. So hopefully that covers the why people use AIOs. I think, again, I think mainly it's the cool factor people think they're into, that they're getting something awesome, and that's just not the case. So, all right. So why do I not like liquid cooling? And I want to clarify, it's not that I don't like liquid cooling. I just don't have much of a use for it, right? Think of that scene out of Quigley Down Under, the final showdown, when he finally uses a pistol and he tells him, it's not that I said I couldn't use it. I just don't have much use for it. It's kind of like that for me. Air cooling has always served me, and until it doesn't, it will. And that's pretty much it. And I'm going to explain why. So for me, when I look at things that have been done, liquid cooling seems to be of no benefit or no added benefit if you have air conditioning. Now, I don't have air conditioning, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you have air conditioning and your house is constantly chilled to a wonderful 74 degrees, heat is not a huge issue in your house. You're not combating external heat. You're just dealing with the ambient temperature and the heat your system's putting off. So to me, if systems are designed to run optimally at room temp like that with fans based on design specs, then why would I need a liquid cooler? Again, we get into that cool factor, right? If the room is 70 to 80 degrees, right? And that's an average for me. So 70, think higher 70s for me in most cases. Now I'm in a basement in Colorado, so I'm lucky that it doesn't get exceptionally hot all the time. There are times when it does get into the 80s down here, and that sucks because there's no good way to remove that heat. And I don't have AC. I have no AC. I haven't had AC in, I think, any home I've lived in my entire life. And I've always had desktop computers and had to struggle with that. And, high 70s to 80s, mid 80s even, has been a fact of life. I lived in New Mexico before I lived in Colorado. So that was an issue running a PC, but I managed and the PC did fine. Granted, those were older systems that had less heat output, but even on more modern systems, this system has ran through a summer, no problem. And we'll see how it goes this summer. It's been warmer this summer, but I don't think that enough testing or the proper testing for real world conditions has been done for liquid coolers. And I say that because I watch a lot of tech channels, and I've only seen one that did testing in a closet sized room where they had the heat up. And I don't think that was an accurate test because the room was too small and the conditions were not correct. What I would like to see is a channel run a liquid cool loop in a room that's heated to the mid 70s, then to the 80s, like lower 80s, and then mid 80s. Run those tests with those rooms the size of a bedroom, like a child's bedroom. Run the test with a benchmarking system running full load on that computer while running liquid cooling, and see how well the liquid cooling does compared to fans. I haven't seen a lot of testing for like that. If you guys have any good videos that show that, feel free to send it to me. And then do the same test with fans. Do the same test with fans and see what you get. The principle of using air cooling is moving air is going to be cooler, right? Moving air is going to be cooler because it's constantly being fluctuated throughout the room. With an AIO, we're going to saturate the liquid, and then that liquid is going to be cooled by the fans, right? And then that brings to the question, what happens when the liquid gets saturated with heat and it can't move anymore? In my mind, and this is probably, I think we need better testing this, if the room is mid 80s and the fluid is now saturated to a point where it's now mid 80s, is that liquid cooler going to do any better? Because it seems like, and should be like, that the liquid in there is only going to get as cool as the room's temperature. If that's the case, that's a problem. Fans, though, aren't going to get hot in the same degree. They can push that air out and keep that air moving. It's the same reason we run fans, floor fans, here when it gets hot, because it keeps that air moving. It keeps the room cooler. And that does have a direct effect on my PC cooling. I've had that numerous times where I have a fan in the background blowing that's pushing air around. The room temperature drops, my computer temperature drops. Even though that processor is running warm, it's still getting cooled off. That air is still being vented and exhausted, which, again, if they're going to do testing, that test needs to have results where the AIO is mounted to the top, not the front, because heat naturally rises. So if the case heat is also pushing through that radiator, is that going to have a difference? Or should you put the radiator in the front? There's still a lot of questions I do not feel that have been answered with liquid cooling. And a lot of channels just ran these tests with air conditioning running in their office at 74 degrees, 76 degrees. And they're like, look, it works, done. And that was it. And I think that's very insufficient to proper testing that needs to be done with liquid cooling versus fan cooling, because I think it's too easy to discard fan cooling going, it's 80 degrees, man, your system's going to cook. And I don't think that's accurate. So I would like to see testing done in environments. I don't have the money to buy this equipment to do so, but I'd like to see testing done in environments where it is not the optimal conditions, where air conditioning is this, because I know there are a lot of people who do not have air conditioning. Even living in Colorado, the majority of people that I know do not have air conditioning. I think I have one, I had two friends that had air conditioning. I have one friend now that's air conditioning, but again, he doesn't run a computer. One doesn't run a computer, the other does. But that's the thing is like, if you're not air conditioned, what's that look like? I don't know where it's at here where I'm at. The thermometer I have on the wall is too far away, but um, again, during hot summers, I've ran fine, and I know it's been well into the 80s in terms of temperature ambiently, and just having floor fans and having case fans has done just fine. So, and then again, to ask, how much performance are you gaining using liquid cooling? If it's 1 to 2%, even up to 3%, that's not enough for me to care. It's just not. It's not worth the money, depending on what the cost of the air cooler is going to be, or liquid cooler is going to be. It's not worth the money to me at that point. So, the last point to step on is that AIOs can have a failure due to more complex setup. That's not necessarily true anymore. I saw that. I'm going to drop a channel name here because I'm not trying to argue with tech channels, but I saw Gamers Nexus make the comment that all AIOs will eventually fail. And I don't think he completed what I would have on that thought, which is, but all PC components are going to fail eventually. And they made a very good point that all air cooler or all liquid coolers are going to fail at some point. They have a higher rating of hours than some fans, but the pump is going to fail. The radiator can spring a leak eventually. The fans on the radiator can fail. Every computer component's going to fail at some point. Maybe you're on those components for 20 years. At some point, a part is going to fail. And in my opinion, the cost of replacing an AIO is going to be more expensive still than it will be to just replace fans. That being said, I do know and realize that AIO costs have dropped. There are some affordable loops out there, but again, I think those need to be better tested. Just because an AIO is more affordable doesn't mean it's going to work comparably to more expensive ones, right? I mean, if you told me there was a $10 AIO on Temu, I'm probably not going to get that because I can guess what the performance off that's going to be, and I don't want to stick that in a computer where I've spent at least $1,000 getting parts together, right? It's a no for me. But fans will be cheap. They're going to be cheap. The liquid loops are going to be expensive. Now, there are use cases for that, and I'll get to that. But for me, it's still not worth it at this point. Based on cost and performance gain, it's not enough to matter at this point. So, hope that helps in why I don't like liquid cooling, or why I'm just not using it at this point. All right, so why use fans? Why still use fans? Well, one, they're easy to install. Liquid coolers take a little more effort to put in. You have to be careful with how you install them, how you're bending the tubes, or any of that. There can be problems there. You might spring a leak if you do it wrong. Setting up the flow wrong can cause issues. Stress on the pump, you can burn a pump out. There are a lot of issues. So for a first-time build, I'm going to recommend that you do fans, especially if you're watching this as a guide of what to get and what to do. Fans are cheaper. It cost me less than $100 to get there were stock fans in my Montec case that I got, but to get have three 140s on the front, and I have three 140s on the top. So that's 6 fans, and then a 140 millimeter in the back. So 7 of those fans cost me, that was less than $60 for all those when I bought them, if I remember right. So to me, that's way cheaper. And I have spares too, because I didn't just get one pack. I got 2 packs of, I think, 4. So I have like a spare. Plus I have the original Montec fans if I need to. I just decided I wanted the Arctic fans. I've liked them as a brand. I used them in my potato. They did really good, and I decided to spend the extra money. I didn't need to, but I wanted them. They have great reviews. Those have always served me well. But again, I have the Montec fans as a backup. Those have got great reviews. The fans that came with this case, I should say. So that's why I got those. But it is going to be important that you get the right size of fan, right? If you're very far away from your tower, you could probably go with 120 millimeter fans. But what does that mean? Well, the fans are going to run louder. Smaller fans run louder. I forget the size on my old potato. I want to say it was 30 millimeter was the size of the fan. Those original size case fans from back in the day is what that used. My old Dell used those. And I had 4 fans in that machine, and it was a little bit louder. It was far louder than this machine. But again, you couldn't hear it over headphones. It wasn't an issue. I knew the fans were running, but it wasn't so bothersome or so noticeable that people walked in and go, God, what's that noise? Or if I was gaming, they're like, do you hear that? Even streaming. I streamed years with that fan set up, with those fans running full blast, because that board also did not have control. Those fans ran full bore all the time, minus the CPU Wraith cooler. The case fans ran full bore all the time. So they were running max speed 24/7, no control, no, no adjustment to those fans, and it was still not noticeable. Louder, but not noticeable. I want to say that was running at like 60 dB or something like that. I can't remember now. I did sound testing early on with an app on my phone, so it's probably not the most accurate, but I did the testing and it was loud. This is much quieter. So getting the right size fans is important. I recommend, if your case is big enough, you're not doing a micro build, 140 millimeter fans, even whatever you can fit them in, are going to be better because they're bigger blades, bigger fan. They are turning slower, but moving more air. That's just the basic principle of those. So it's going to be something that's going to help, move a lot more air a lot quicker, right? Like if you could stick a box fan on the side of your computer case doing air intake, if it didn't cause dust issues, maybe put a screen over that, you would probably see wonderful cooling results if you had a box fan attached to the side of your tower, just blowing air in that thing, because it's a bigger fan moving more air. It's going to be louder, much louder, but it's going to move a lot more. And even on low, it's going to be super loud, but it's moving a lot more air. So kind of an idea there. It's like when you see wind machine fans, how they cool a room down very quick. They're louder, but they're moving that air very fast. And on lower, they're quieter, but they can achieve more at those lower speeds because they're bigger fans. Anyway, probably didn't need to loop all that in there. If you're in an air-conditioned environment, again, I'm going to say if you're in an AC-controlled environment, it may not matter. So that's one of those things where you have to choose based off of a cost decision. Because if you can control the internal temperature of your home to mid 70s, you're probably not going to have an issue with overheating. So it's one of those things where you really have to judge how much extra you want to spend on your build. Again, if you can find a AIO that's going to be cheap, a liquid cooler that's going to be cheap comparable to what you're going to spend on fans, or you don't care about spending the money, then get that. If you don't mind the extra complication of setup, then do that. But for me, fans are going to be what's there. They're cheap to replace. Fans have largely not been affected in a astronomical way with price increases in computer parts because fans are fans. So it's the one part I know that if it burns out, I can replace it. Or if I need to get a better performing fan, I can, and I can replace it. Things like that. So that's why I'm a fan of fans, why I use air cooling in my system. It works. And even with these paired with the Peerless Assassin I have, it's done exceptionally well to this point. It has served me well. I have not had overheat issues. I've not hit maximums in temps. It's done really well. So I hope that helps on why I use fans, and we're gonna move on to our last section here. All right, so when should you get an AIO? When should you use an AIO? Some of this is gonna be repeated, so I do apologize, but so if the cost of a liquid cooler is going to be the same as the cost of getting the fans you need for your setup, you may want to go with the liquid cooler. It's up to you. It really depends. If you're not worried about the complication of setting up a liquid cooler, then I would say go for it if the cost isn't a difference. Just keep in mind that, again, getting a replacement liquid cooler, if it does fail or when it does fail, is going to be something you're going to have to factor in later on. But you should be able to budget for a replacement liquid cooler down the road. You may want to buy up extras. I have a recommendation that if you're able to, you should at the time of purchase buy double the parts for many parts. Extra processor, extra board, things like that, so that if one fails, you still have another. With that comes some added responsibility, because then you have to do the due diligence of making sure to update the BIOS on your replacement board. That's in case, you really like your board and you need to swap it out in your system because the old one died. I've had to do that on the Dell machine, but I was able to get spares easily for that Dell machine and it was off warranty. I think that if you're running an exceptionally hot processor that a traditional air-cooled heatsink isn't going to handle, right? I'm talking your monster CPUs, those the 3D, the X3D ones that run hot, that run on the 265 watt range or TDP range. You may want a liquid cooler for that. The liquid coolers are rated a bit higher. That being said, plenty of testing has been done to show that a lot of coolers like the Peerless Assassin and stuff are rating as good as some liquid coolers. We've reached that point where they're doing pretty good with removing the heat. So you may want to look in reviews of both to see what you're doing. But again, if you're looking at these videos, you're probably not building a system that's going to require a liquid cooler. So at this point, it's optional, unless you're building a micro build. I have seen, and I think this is a good use case for it. If you're doing an ITX build, there are smaller liquid coolers that have been put in those that help with the noise. That's where it can help with the noise, because those cases are so small. Even putting 140 millimeter as an exhaust on the back, if it'll fit, and one on the top, if it'll fit, on a lot of these cases, it's going to be loud in that case because you're cooling a lot in a small area. That being said, though, it really depends on the processor you're getting. So really look at how much heat your system looks to generate and then get your cooling solution from there. Again, liquid cooling may be a better use for small systems, but that being said, consoles are still using fans to cool themselves. So if consoles are going to be compacted and small and you're building to performance that's going to play games like they do, you may not need a liquid cooler. You probably won't. The Steam machine is not using a liquid cooler. And yes, I know the argument is those systems are custom tuned to run at a certain performance level. I get that and understand that. But if these systems are touting 4K output, which is where a lot of heat is generated, they're touting 4K output and they're still using fans to cool their systems. And like the Steam machine, so far it looks like it has a single fan for exhaust. I could be wrong. I haven't looked at the specs in a while, but if it's using 1 or 2 fans, we'll put it that way, and it's air cooled and they're pumping juice through that, through a processor that's supposed to upscale to 4K, I think you're going to be fine in an ITX build if you're just doing 1080 gaming. Because remember, everything we've been talking about is running 1080 up to maybe 2K, which is 1440. In gaming, I think it'll be fine. The requirements to cool are just not that high at this point. So, and again, I like my processors to be, 150 or less on that TDP. It's a good number. It runs fine. All the excess is just excess. And I'm not a huge fan, as I talked about before, I'm not a huge fan of X3D processors, but I do more than just gaming. My computer is a multi-purpose rig. It games. It is primarily a gaming rig, but I do a lot of other work on that machine, from video rendering, some 3D design that's in Blender. At this point, I'm testing out Unreal. Those are all running fine. Trying to think what else. Photoshop work, all that does fine with what I have. So for me, liquid cooling is not worth it. And if you're building based off of what I'm recommending, you're not going to need liquid cooling. It's something you can upgrade to if you want, but it's not something you're going to need at this point. The option's still there, though, if you need to upgrade to a beefier processor that's going to require that. But as I stated in another video too, I think the liquid cooling thing was a big deal when more people were overclocking. So if you're going to overclock, yeah, you may want to look into liquid cooling, but I don't think overclocking is necessary anymore. I just don't. Not on modern AM4, AM5 processors. I know there are some processors that just run hot that are going to require a liquid cooler. I've seen that. I think you should look into alternatives if that's what you're looking at as a processor that says must have liquid cooling, because I don't think it's worth it. So anyway, I hope that helps on when to use liquid cooling, where you should look for that, and when you should use that. All right, guys, that should wrap it up. That's just the general discussion over air cooling versus liquid cooling. My thoughts on that, why I don't think you're going to need it. If you feel I've missed anything, feel free to leave a comment below, and I can go over that in another video, or I can respond to your comments in that. But that should be about all there is. It shouldn't need to be a very long video. I don't think this video is very long anyway. But we're quickly getting to the end of this video series. I only have 3 planned videos left. The next one I'll be talking about APCs or battery backups and why those are important, why you should have them, more than just in case there's a power outage. I think there's some useful information there. And if you're going to make an investment in an expensive machine, you should definitely look into a battery backup or an APC. And I'll explain all of that coming up here. That video will come out hopefully next week, unless something else comes in line. But that's what we got for now. So hope it was helpful, guys. And I thank you for watching this video.